All right, guys, I sound like a goddamn broken record, don't I? So, still haven't put anything in yet, but we have done stuff. So, as you can see, my valve covers are off. I pulled the spark plugs out. I wanted to check if maybe perhaps I had a bent valve. The noise that I was hearing, some say there's no way it could have been detonation, but I put 110 in the fuel cell and the noise went away at idle. The only reason why I questioned if I maybe had a bent valve is because what I was either hearing was detonation or a valve getting hung up and getting slapped back closed. So, not that that can't happen, but if I smack the valve, chances are I bent it. So I wanted to see if I had a leak somewhere. So I turned on my air compressor, grabbed a rubber tip air gun, and just put a little compressed air through the cylinder with that cylinder at top dead center. And just kind of did it at about 50 to 60 psi. I didn't have an actual gauge on it. This is like just a quick, just to see if I heard anything. This wasn't like with a actual, leak down tester. Leak tester. Where you have to dial it in and yada yada yada, all that stuff. Yeah, I know how to do that. This was just kind of a poor man's way to see if, we did this before on the J-headed 350. So, with that being said, I didn't hear anything out of anywhere. It takes very little air pressure for this engine to turn over. So I checked every cylinder. They all turn over fairly easy with little to not a lot of air pressure, meaning that we got some pretty good seal between the valves and the rings, and that our drag on the motor is not tight. So that's a good thing too. So with that being said, I just did, each cylinder top dead center, I kind of gauged it. If the engine would turn over with the amount of pressure, then I would turn it back with the wrench and then just slowly creep in on the air pressure until I felt that that's all it could handle, before it would start to turn over. But essentially I can kind of turn the engine over until the valves opened up, with very little air pressure. I didn't have to completely blast it or anything. So what I was mainly checking for, if there was any possibility of air leaks. No leaks at the guides or anything like that, which the guides, you wouldn't, if the valves are sealing, you wouldn't be able to tell, but everything seems to be okay in that department. And that was just for shits and grins. I wanted to check it out. Now, the only possibility that it could be breaking up on the top end is if, these are brand new valve springs, but that does not mean they are good. But again, throwing a new ignition system on this car isn't necessarily throwing parts at it. We are working with some older HEI units, even though I've put a different module, different coils, different caps and rotors and everything. Our only good HEI is the one that broke. So, I got my panel over here, and this is going to kind of be my layout. I am going to go with a different bus bar, because I actually want to put straight leads on there. So I'm going to have a bus bar for ground, bus bar for power, thick gauge wires coming into the engine compartment. We're going to have room for all of our relays, and everything is going to be set up nice. I got rubber isolators and grommets for everything. And then hopefully, but that also means that we're going to rewire everything. And I'm going to show you guys why. I think I talked about this before, and the time, as the Chambers brothers said, has come today. And you could see that everything is labeled, but everything was tucked in really nice. But I want to redo this, make it more accessible. Everything was kind of hidden behind this 8-track gauge pod. So really, in the car, you couldn't see any of this. This was all tucked away and nice and zip-tied. But if something were to go wrong, I would kill some time tracing wires. Even though everything is labeled and all of our power wires going into, all of our trigger wires going into the switches are all hot and labeled, they are ultimately all the same color. The only way to differentiate this is down at the fuse block where we have different colors for stuff coming in. Like our water, our fans, our fuel pump, those are all different colors. But when I did this a while back, I did have help from my buddy Dave Meyer, which is probably the only reason why it worked out. If you guys saw the wiring on his car, it's immaculate, but he's got some really nice stuff. And this was kind of making do with what we had, and it worked. But now it's time to step it up a notch, and I'm going to go ahead and rewire all of my auxiliary stuff. Everything is going to be on that panel. It's going to be located somewhere in here. I'm going to work on knocking out the rest of the AC and heat stuff that's underneath the dash and try to mount that panel in a location where it wouldn't kill footboard space. So another thing too is these connector leads actually did get toasty on my electric fan, and you know, we were running everything correctly, but the main power going in, which this is, I believe, the main power wire going into, if I remembered correctly, no, that's not the main power. This is the main power right here, the red one. This one is the main going out, and these two would be your triggers, I believe. Ground and trigger. Again, been a while, but roughly. So the wire going to the electric fans was kind of getting hot, and we got 12 gauge on there. But I do have, you know, and it's not the only one. What's up, Finnegan? The water pump got hot as well, and that's a very low draw, by the way. So these got hot, but nothing, I never popped any fuses or anything. And we are using a hot trigger for the relays, which I believe is the best way to go from everything I've read, because once the power dies, the relay, you know, shuts off. Or, you know, yeah. So it's an electromagnetic field that has to be triggered. So our fuel pump relay is fine. Totally fine. But that doesn't have one of these plastic connectors. I individually hooked up the female spade connectors onto that and wired that all up. So maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But we'll see when we get the new, I'm buying new relays with fuses integrated into them to go away from the fuse block. And then everything will be more compact on my panel. And then I have to rewire all of my switches for the trigger on the relays. And it's going to take like a solid day of work once I get everything. But I came out here last night and started planning. And once I dove into this, I knew I wanted to redo it. And I have to bring in new leads into the engine compartment for the way that I'm doing it. So there's stuff to do and stuff to think and stuff to consider. But we'll get there as we make waves. But as far as everything goes, our layout is going to be pretty compact. There's not going to be a lot of stuff to it. I'm going to end up having 6 relays, which the relays that I'm buying are interconnectable, so they're actually probably going to be pretty tight because you can wire them together. And I'm going to have the bus bars, one as a ground post, one as a power post, and we're going to run our direct power from the relay to the positive, and then our ground, which I'll probably end up I just switched them for all intensive purposes, but our power is going to be the closest to the relay. Our ground is going to be the furthest one away, because if anything goes wrong with the ground, you know, it's going to be bare wire to ground surface. It's not, and this is a metal plate that I'm going to paint, and I'm going to have isolators for this, but this is all going to be mounted with rubber. Actually, a trick I learned is this. So we're going to end up using the bushings out of sway bar end link, and we're going to use plastic washers to isolate anywhere where we bolt, so that this panel, there is no way that this panel could be a ground. The only way that it would be a ground would be to go through the chassis, through the bus bar, which I'm changing the bus bars to something else. So I hope I've bored you guys enough. Another thing, we did check all of our spark plug wires, and the brand new Spiral Pro Taylors actually had the most resistance, all under an ohm per foot, which is what it's supposed to be. But the Taylor Thunderbolt wires, which are quite old, I might add, actually, like this one's like 0.115, I think the highest one was like a 0.18 something resistance. Some of these Spiral Pro, the longer ones were like 1.0 something, but they were at a foot plus of length, so that's okay. But we weren't seeing anything out of the ordinary, so I did check the spark plug wires, and those are fairly new, but I'm going to go with the Thunderbolt ones and just use one because one of the Thunderbolt wires broke, so I just got to get the right length, lowest resistance, and fit it in there. Now, another interesting point to make is I bought these Moroso wires, the Magtune Spiral Core wires. They are about the same resistance as the Taylor Spiral Pro, and I believe these are actually made in the USA, and they are really cheap. Yep, says right there, made in the USA. This is what I had on the run stand, and they worked really well. They pretty much checked out the same as the Spiral Pros, probably about half the cost. So I recommend that. Those wires work. These Thunderbolts, though, the 8.2s, even better. And I think they only cost a couple more bucks than the Taylor Spiral Pro. They're both Taylor wires, but whatever. At this point, I'm rambling. But hopefully that helps somebody else out there. And another thing I did check for was also the gear mesh at the distributor as far as like going back and forth. I'll show you guys that real fast because this is the nice thing of having shit lying everywhere is that we have the opportunity to do stuff like this. So cam is in, you know, this is what we're checking, like the right there, that backlash right there. That's about 40 thousandths. So you have to take into consideration the diameter of the distributor, how much backlash it is, and how much that's going to affect your timing. Because if you got, let's say, this is 40 thou, and let's say that roughly comes out to like a degree of timing at the distributor, that's going to be 2 at the crank. And in the actual engine that it's going to be in, I have about 70 thou, which I measured it out with a dial indicator and everything, and the backlash on that was, on this one, it was 70, so it's 30 thou more. It's less than double. So let's say hypothetically we're seeing a 4-degree difference if, and that's only if, the timing moves under load. But after talking with people that I know and getting good advice, virtually under load, you're not going to see anything move. Now, another conversely interesting thing I was also told is that the drag from the oil pump could cause it to move. But from what I'm told, I would probably see an even greater effect on timing at deceleration. And again, these are all just things that I'm diving into for possibility reasons, just to make sure that, you know, everything is good. Now, another thing to mention is I did upgrade the oil pump rod to a Mylodon hardened one-piece. Obviously, they're all one-piece, but I put a hardened one in there. So, you know, I did check the valve lash. Nothing has moved. You know, it seems like everything is sealing, and we know that we don't have a dead cylinder. All of our spark plugs look really good. It's not like the 350 with the J-heads where we were killing the cylinder because we were killing the spark, because all of the oil that was landing on top of the piston was getting pushed into the spark plug, and it would eventually just kill the plug, kill the spark, and it would die. And when we figured that out, we were just swapping out the spark plug in between rounds until I decided to dive into it, and then that's when we found out that that pin had walked out, got just shit out of the cylinder wall, and we had a lot of oil, and it was to the point where, like, if you idled it after 20 minutes, it would start backfiring out of the carb because it wasn't firing, it was fighting its way out of every way it possibly could. In this situation, we're only popping out of the exhaust, and it's under heavy load, cruising around 4,000 RPM, which this thing cruises at. This thing is great. No problems, no issues. AFR is a little fat, but it's going to save our asses if we are truly detonating. But that's kind of it. So this video has been longer than needed, but when we wire stuff up, I'll cover some of that shit and we'll go from there. So I'll let you guys go. Share, like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram as Coppercolors. We'll see you around.